So Alyssa Bormes here is a Catholic author. Her book is over here. And she's also a speaker who has a passion for helping others take on a greater personal responsibility for their faith. Her book, Catechism of Hockey, intriguing title. Many of you have probably already read it, but she uses the metaphor of hockey and sports devotion to explain the responsibility of Catholic parents in raising their children and the teachings and observances of the Church. So Alyssa received her master's degree right here from Catholic Studies at the University of St. Thomas and studied at the Pontifical University of St. Thomas in Rome, Italy. She also holds a Bachelor of Arts degree in psychology from the University of Minnesota in Minneapolis. And tonight, Alyssa will share with us about entertaining angels and coming home to grace. So please welcome Alyssa.
All right, can you hear me? Perfect. Thank you so much for having me here. And I told Father Palomino before I started that you have, or sort of from here, you have one of my students, Brother Joe Barron, who's now in Peru. And I was his teacher for 2 years at the Chesterton Academy, and I'm certain that I'm responsible for all the good. But one of my favorite memories of him is that there was a day, there was this window they could crawl out of, which of course they weren't supposed to, but I didn't care. And so they would crawl out this window and sort of sit on this roof of a room that was one story and had a roof out there. So they'd sit on the roof, and I was driving up, and Joe and another student were singing, they were serenading me as I came up. Joe was playing the guitar, and they were using all my sayings. I often say things like "oi" or "Mamma Mia." I love a fish fry or a soup supper, and I love the kids flying around, and that was the cutest thing I've ever seen. I just love it. We're so Catholic. Anyway, so they were serenading me with a song that they made up of all my sayings, which was hilarious. And so, anyway, he's a favorite. Then, when I start, I always answer the 3 questions that you're bound to ask me later if you come and buy a book, which you should. No, I am not a hockey mom. No, I cannot skate. Although on the cover are my dad's skates and my little girl skates, my first skates, and I was his worst student at skating, much less hockey. I didn't know anything. You don't need to know anything about hockey to read the book, because I don't know anything about it anyway, but you'll think I do. And then the other thing, oh, you know, my phone sounds just like that, so I'm so glad that's not my phone. That's a hoot. And then the other question is, how did I think of the Catechism of Hockey? But it all came down to sin, because in hockey there are major and minor penalties, and when you go to the box, so Catholic, right? Mortal venial, go to the box. In hockey, one of the names for the box is the sin bin, right? And then the other thing that's so Catholic about it is that you make your team play shorthanded. When you're in the box, you're making your team, actually when you have a penalty called, you make your team play shorthanded. And then when the penalty is over, for example at the Gopher games, when the penalty is over, the announcer will say the Gophers are at full strength, and the crowd yells back, they always were. And that is God's mercy and confession as well, right? That the sin is gone. It's as if you always were at full strength, but the temporal consequences still need to be dealt with. In hockey, that's having either be scored against or your team has tired legs, and so you have to go and deal with that temporal consequence. But in the faith, of course, in the spiritual life, for me, I'm always owing somebody an apology. I have to get a hold of some vice, right? The sin is gone, but the temporal consequences remain. So, in the act of shameless self-promotion, get the book. And 2 weeks ago, the study guide came out, so I hope you get that as well. Anyway, here we are. Entertaining angels and coming home to grace. Hebrews 13:1. Let brotherly love continue. Do not neglect to show hospitality to strangers, for thereby some have entertained angels unawares. I love that verse. Or I think it's really 2 verses. And of course, then you remember Jesus saying, if you love me, you will keep my commandments. And one of the supreme commandments is that of charity or love, right? The golden rule. A new commandment I give you, that you love one another, even as I have loved you, that you also love, I said it wrong. A new commandment I give you, that you love one another, even as I have loved you. That you also, I've written it wrong. You know the commandment I'm talking about. Love God with all your heart, soul, might, and then love your neighbor as yourself. So, a quick visit to the corporal works of mercy. Feed the hungry. Give drink to the thirsty. Clothe the naked. Harbor the harborless. Visit the sick. Ransom the captive. Bury the dead. Hungry, thirsty, shelter. It's certainly easy to find that those fit in with hospitality. And hospitality used to be listed as one of the corporal works of mercy, and different lists that they'll just say hospitality. So you could make a case somehow that all the corporal works of mercy involve some manner of hospitality, even burying the dead, because of the care we take of the family, right? So hospitality and angels. Who has done this? Abraham and Sarah, right? In Genesis 18, they welcome angels and serve them a meal. Lot, in Genesis 19, welcomes angels along with Abraham. But Lot twists up hospitality. And we're not going to go over too much of that, but he has hospitality going for him, and then all of a sudden there's a group of people outside, and he offers his daughters to them. He perverts the gift. He puts hospitality above the virtue of his daughters, which shouldn't be, right? Hospitality has its place. Tobit, who was a host to Raphael. In all of these, there was hospitality offered to the angels. And they didn't offer them hospitality because they were angels. Oh, if it's an angel, for sure, come on over, right? That wasn't it. They offered them hospitality and found out that they were angels. The angels were sort of under the cover of travelers or wayfarers who turned out, and then they turned out to be angels. But all this, of course, is from the Old Testament. So cute. But in the New Testament, in Matthew 25, hungry and you gave me food, thirsty, you gave me drink. Oh, no, I love it. I love it. This is the yes to life. You know, honestly, that in the culture of death, that isn't acceptable. In my life, that's one of the most beautiful things you can see. So, anyway. So, hungry, you gave me food. Thirsty, you gave me to drink. A stranger, you welcomed me. Naked, you clothed me. Sick, you visited me. In prison, you came to me. And then later, Jesus explains, of course, that whenever you did this to the least, you did it to me. And just as a side note, many of you might already know Mother Teresa, her five-word prayer that she always used her fingers for. She'd say, "You did it to me." And that's what she would remember as she's gathering in these souls, right? Hospitality is welcoming Jesus. God is the perfect host, and he's the perfect host in the garden and at the Last Supper for certain, right? In the Garden of Eden, just think of God as a host. What does he do? He creates a place for his guests. That's fantastic. He created them paradise for his guests to come to. That's incredible. Now, eventually, of course, Adam and Eve disregarded his hospitality in an act of pride. And then throughout the Bible, we see hospitality done well and hospitality perverted for trying to get something, right? We talked about Abraham and Sarah welcoming the 3 angels. Lot, who then has good hospitality, but then offers his daughters to this mom. Rebecca, who shows hospitality to Abraham's servant at the well. But then later Rebecca perverts hospitality when she tries to help Jacob fool Isaac. And even after the resurrection, I love this, we see two disciples incredulous for joy, and we're amazed when Jesus has risen and come back to them. And Jesus had to ask for something to eat. That's fantastic. They're in this awe and wonder, like, whoa, there he is, right? And they forget that little gift of hospitality, but Jesus reminds them of it. Do you have something for me to eat? Beautiful. Then again, there's the perfect example going back just a hair before the Passion. Jesus at the Last Supper is the perfect host. And this part where he takes a towel and ties it around his waist, I can't imagine what that meant or what that looked like to the disciples, the apostles then. Because only a slave would tie the towel around the waist. That's an action of a slave. And that he would do that, and they're seeing this whole picture come true now. The covenant's been broken. Someone has to die when a covenant is broken. Usually, it's not the people who made the covenant that one of them dies. It's usually a slave that dies. So here they are at the Last Supper. He takes a towel, ties it around his waist. He's not only the perfect host at the Last Supper, but they understand he's taking on this role as a slave. And then, no wonder Peter is caught off guard, right? And look at the lessons of service. That hospitality has everything to do with service. Even a cleansing of sorts. So how does this all tie back to you here today? We're as far away from Jerusalem as we can get, right? And as far away from the Garden of Eden. So simply hospitality and entertaining angels. I am aware that this is the first Friday of Lent. And Lenten hospitality seemed to be this contradiction, although right here you are in the basement and we have been hosted so beautifully by Father and his staff and the volunteers, right? So here's Lenten hospitality right in front of you. But we don't think about having people over constantly during Lent. Well, we'll keep it really simple. Lent is this stripping away of the excess, right? And hospitality sounds like party, which seems excessive. But I'm going to make the case that hospitality is utterly Lenten. And real hospitality is about being utterly present. It's a manner of living, and it doesn't depend on a place. But of course, we love a place, don't we? Someplace that's clean, comfortable, where we're waited on. We get to be present in that moment and present to others. Now, I love talking about this next part because whenever we talk about hospitality, there's always this confusion and sort of stress, in a sense, of Martha and Mary, this story of hospitality in the Bible, and what the heck is going on? Because Martha seems to be doing all the work, and Mary gets all the glory, and I don't really get it, so let's talk about Martha and Mary just to get to that before we get to everything else. It's in Luke 10, 38 to 42. Just these few verses will flip people over, you know? Now as they went on their way, he entered a village, and a woman named Martha received him into her house. And she had a sister called Mary, who sat at the Lord's feet and listened to his teaching. But Martha was distracted with much serving. And she went to him and said, "Lord, do you not care that my sister has left me to serve alone? Tell her then to help me." But the Lord answered her, "Martha, Martha, you are anxious and troubled about many things. One thing is needful. Mary has chosen the good portion, which shall not be taken from her." So let's just look at that story, unpack it a little bit. I think we can all identify with Martha, especially the women here. Right? We can all identify with Martha. We've all been there. We've all been the one doing the work when someone else isn't doing the work. We've all watched someone sit around And Martha is preparing a feast. And that's a good thing. Augustine, he has a different take on it. I love it. He tells us that Mary is already feasting as she sits at the feet of Christ listening to his words. It's fantastic. She's feasting as she sits at his feet listening to him. In 1 Samuel, right, we hear this, "Speak, Lord, for your servant is listening." It's as if Mary is sitting there with this, "Speak, Lord, I'm listening." And he's saying, in another sense, tell me, bring everything to me, right? But Martha's alone working. So listen again to her and her anxiety. "Lord, do you not care that my sister has left me to serve alone?" And then his response, "Martha, Martha, you are anxious and troubled about many things." Martha is anxious. Of course she is. She's wounded. I always tell people that there is a fail-safe way to tell if someone is wounded. I've never had it proven wrong to me. If you're breathing, you're wounded, right? It's just the way life is. The fall is the first wound. She sees what she deems as an injustice. And like all of us, she probably has a few wounds before this moment. Right? She's had Christ come to her home, but she has a boatload of wounds that came before that moment of seeing Mary sit there. And she feels overlooked, unheard, alienated. And one of the things is we all want someone to hear us. Don't you hear me? Right? Even when we say to our kids, didn't you hear me? We're not talking about their auditory skills, right? We're speaking about, why aren't you obeying me? You need to take in what I'm saying. So one more time, listen to Christ. Jesus is not against hospitality. He's the hospitable one when he says, come away with me, right? He's always inviting people to him. Mary has chosen the good portion which shall not be taken from her. Of course, this feels like a reprimand. But what if we take a closer look at that? Why is Mary's part better? That is the question. How is her part better? She is single-hearted. And she goes to Christ first before she acts, right? She goes to him to be single-heartedly with Christ before acting. It's a foretaste of heaven. Isn't that fantastic? A foretaste of heaven. And it's not selfish to go to Christ first. Going to Jesus can be a deserted place, frankly. Isn't that what we're going to do in the Stations of the Cross? We're going to go to him. And we're going to enter all of Lent as this deserted place. So can we take the silence? Can we take no distractions? That Jesus, I trust in you. And Jesus has a way of pushing people that are close to him. For example, when he says to Peter, get behind me, Satan. Wow, hey, I'm your guy that is going to be your first pope, and you're saying this to me? Do you really think I'm going to stick around? No, he knows he's going to stick around. Because Peter's already said there's no place else to go. Right? He knows he's going to stick around. Jesus has this sense of outrageous mercy, especially to the souls that are so far away. But the soul is close to him. He'll push. Right? As you get closer to Christ, as we all get closer to Christ, you felt being pushed now and again. And so he's pushing Martha. He knows she's close. Martha acts before going to Christ, which leaves her anxious. She's not single-hearted, she's distracted. But Christ doesn't want this for any of us. We constantly are praying for peace, for a settled heart. Now listen again. Martha, Martha, you are anxious and troubled about many things. One thing is needful. Mary has chosen the good portion, which shall not be taken from her. He's inviting Martha to the good portion, to the desert of being alone with him. Martha was inviting Jesus to a meal, but Jesus is inviting her further to him. And then the part which shall not be taken away from her. And I think that Mary could have set aside being close to Christ, but no one can take that from her. That should give us a lot of comfort. That my closeness with Christ, it's mine to set aside if I'm foolish enough to do so. But no one else can take it from me. Which means it's a choice. And it's Martha's choice to make if she wants to make it. It's fantastic. And that she doesn't have to set it aside. So there's so much comfort in that. And the last thing, I doubt that Martha's ache had anything to do with making a meal. Why does she feel alienated? I think that she wants Mary's spot. Mary took it from me, is probably what you could think. That's why Jesus is saying it can't be taken from her, which means it can't be taken from Martha either. He's there for Martha as well, and she just needs to go to him. He does hear her, right? Every now and then it feels like Jesus is doting on somebody else, and you think, how come they're getting all this, that, and the other thing, and how come I'm not getting anything? Just because he's doting on someone else doesn't mean he's forgotten you. That's the first thing. How come they have, what we're really saying is, I feel forgotten. I feel alienated. I'm anxious. And back to woundedness. We fear being forgotten. Jesus hasn't forgotten you. Martha is worthy of love. You're all worthy of love. I think that's one of the hardest things to really believe. I am worthy of love. I know my own history, and there's not a lot in it that says I'm worthy of love. But God, in his wild mercy, says that I am. Now, we so quickly side with Martha, and we recognize her wounds. We understand her toil, we understand her anxiousness, but we overlook Mary. And we think, oh, sure, I know, I'm looking at Mary, she's the one just sitting around. But we forget Mary, the woman. But Jesus hasn't forgotten Mary. And earlier we talked about everyone is wounded. If you're breathing, you're wounded. We know this, but we forget it when it's somebody else. When they get to sit close to Jesus and they're being doted on, we forget, they're wounded and they need this. Mary is wounded. She's not selfish, she's wounded. And Jesus is ministering to her. And Martha, more than anyone, knew that Mary was wounded because Martha is her sister. She's been with her forever. And she's seen the wounds that have come to her sister. The ache in Martha is that she wants to have time alone with Jesus. We all do. And so what is the lesson of this before we get back to hospitality and entertaining angels? When we're anxious, especially about what others have, that they have the good portion, just remember Jesus hasn't forgotten you. And he might be ministering to your sisters or your brother's wounds. Don't forget that your sister or brother have wounds, even in the face of your own. Go back to Psalm 46, right? Be still and know that I am God. And know that in the stillness, you can allow Jesus to enter the wounds. Now, this is this invitation in, and he gives it to all of us. But one of the things we have to do is go give that away. A quick note about hospitality. Sometimes there's a question of either I'll be hospitable or I'll be single-hearted. Well, the church isn't full of either ors, it's full of both and. Both, I will be hospitable and I'll be single-hearted. So we're going to jump into entertaining angels. Let's look at 3 places for entertaining them. 3 places, just very common, there's a million more. Coffee shops, your home, and your presence. So we'll start with coffee shops. It's one of my favorite places in the whole wide world. It's where I wrote my book. Just in case you're wondering, you should buy it. Shameless self-promotion now and again. So let's start with the coffee shops. Hospitality has become this lost art. We pay people to be hospitable. And the coffee shops seem to understand it. There are very few places who really understand hospitality, but coffee shops get it. And they have sort of become the living room of the nation. Living in a big city, I came from Eden Prairie tonight through traffic, right, to get here. So I wouldn't just swing by someone's house. I know Mary Payne here. So I wouldn't just swing by Mary Payne's house to see if she's around, because it's so far out of my way. I would call her first. So we don't have this drop-in sort of mentality in a big city. In my small town, we just stop in and see if my aunt or uncle or whoever is home, the cousins are home, because it's a tiny little town and it doesn't interrupt your schedule. But that doesn't happen here. And then the distances can be so difficult. But there's always a coffee shop someplace in the middle, right? So we can meet. And the beautiful thing there is that you're waited on, but you're not smothered. I love that. And you never feel like you're getting kicked out until they close. I've been kicked out of many. Do you know we're closing in 5 minutes? Oh, I have no idea. So, somehow in our distracted world, coffee shops have become this place where we can put aside distractions. And one of the cool things being there is that you don't have any duties. All you have to do is go get your coffee and go get it warmed up if it's getting low, right? And you don't have to do laundry, there isn't anything, you don't have to go organize that drawer, you don't have to do anything. You're just at the coffee shop, you don't have any duties, so you can just sit. I don't need to multitask. And coffee shops are one of the few places we have left that you can linger. We don't linger enough. We just don't linger enough, right? You can rest or read, or here's a big one, have a conversation. And if you're going to have a conversation, you need a topic. And I think the vernacular of the society, in a sense, is sports are safe. Gardening, oddly enough, is usually a safe topic. Eating. And coffee is a safe topic. Right? So you need sort of because there's so many people that we don't agree with. I don't know if you've seen it or felt that, but there's a few people that don't quite agree with faithful Catholics. So somehow in a coffee shop, we're on the same footing as everybody else. And in conversation, you need to find common grounds. I'm just going to wait because that's my bad joke. You get it? Common grounds. Thank you. The jokes do not get any better. So think of Jesus and the woman at the well. They could not be more different, right? She's a woman of a certain reputation. He's God, right? There's a big difference. But what does he say? Give me a drink. He says, in essence, I thirst. A quick note here. To make a friend, ask a favor of them. People never understand this, especially if if somehow one person is like higher in social stature or something. If that higher person asks the lower person for the favor, not vice versa, you're making a friend. It could be the other way around, but just for an example. Let's say the Pope was here tonight and he said, hey, can you give me a ride? I'm falling over myself trying to give the guy a ride, right? Because I know this makes some bond between us. Me doing the Pope a favor, really? And plus I'm hoping to drive the Pope-mobile. No, I really am hoping to drive a Zamboni one day, but if he were to ask you for a favor, you'd fall over yourself trying to do it. And you've made a friend. Remember that. Ask someone a favor, and they become a friend. It's fantastic. So Jesus asked for a favor, to give him a drink. And in the end, of course, well, really the whole time, he's been thirsting for her soul. and that she thirsts for this living water. But she doesn't know it in the beginning. She is just about thirst. Later, then she leaves Jesus, and she goes out, and listen to this, she thirsts in his way. That is remarkable. Usually the first sort of meeting with Christ, that first piercing of your heart with Christ, is that you thirst for him. That's the way it should be. That's the way love is that, oh, I have to have him. But as love matures, it ends up that you thirst in his way. He thirsts for souls, so I'm going to go get more souls and bring them in to him. And in a beautiful sense, you can never slake that thirst of his until the end of time, right? When he has all the souls he's ever going to have in heaven with him. So we find this common ground, thirst. So many of us thirst. And we forget. We forget that there's so many souls who thirst. At the coffee shop, you meet friends who thirst. First, they're thirsting for coffee. And then you meet strangers who thirst. And first, they thirst for coffee. But as you meet them, and don't be afraid to meet some strangers. Just get out there and do it, right? I'm pushing you right now. Get out there and do it. You will find souls that feel alienated, feel alone, feel forgotten. Or if you're one of the souls that feels alienated, alone, and forgotten, this is a great time to start serving other people, right? When we serve other people out of our wounds, and the beautiful thing is you can identify those same wounds in them, and that's your common ground. Okay, next we're going to talk about people in your home, and especially during Lent. For some of you, this is second nature to have people in your home. For the rest of us, maybe we have, I love saying this term, hostess psychosis. It's not funny if you say host psychosis. Hostess psychosis, right? What is it? I can't have anyone over until, what would I serve them? I don't have that kind of budget. I can never get a clean house. The back closet drawer is unorganized. And fill in the rest of it with your excuse why you can't have anyone over. Couldn't possibly. Be calm. Be single-hearted. That's anxious. You're Martha when you're thinking of that. Martha in the sense of you're anxious. Be calm. For Lent, make your home a place for guests. Then each day of Lent, make one place clean if it's not clean. Make one place ordered if it's not ordered. Or if you come to my house, I can guarantee you there is a stack of papers or a stack of books or a stack. I love to stack things up. And there's going to be a stack that has to move in order for you to have dinner or for you to sit down or whatever it is, right? So just even if it's one place, keep that place ready all Lent for guests to come. Then just serve coffee or tea or water or wine or a simple meal. Doesn't need to be fancy. You don't need a giant budget. A quick story about my parents. It was every 4th of July we had a huge party, but we always had guests at our house. There was always a guest at our house. But the 4th of July was always a big, big, big party in our backyard. And my dad and another friend were further back in the yard looking back to the party. And the friend said to my dad, "Wow, you have a lot of friends." And my dad said, "Carol," my mom, "Carol cooks for somebody once and we have a friend forever." Isn't that great? It's true, in part. But there's more to it. My mom always had a pot of coffee on. She made egg coffee. Does anyone know what egg coffee is? Yes, I make egg coffee. So you can always have a pot ready to go. So my mom always had a pot of coffee. It's the best coffee. Come over to my house, I'll make it for you. She had a pot of coffee on, and people would come from all over town, which isn't a big town, but they come from all over town to have a cup of her coffee because it was so good. But that really wasn't the reason, is they'd come over, have a cup of coffee. She would push everything aside on the table. She was usually folding clothes for her 8 children and her husband, right? And she'd push everything aside and she'd sit down and have a cup of coffee with them. And that place, that corner of the table, she sat on one side and right someone else on the corner. There were so many souls that were unburdened there. Another example is we would have all sorts of friends, especially when we were in college, that came home with us. And everybody loved to come to my house because my parents were so hospitable. And every now and then you start looking around and you think, okay, let's say the friend's name is Susie. I wonder where Susie went. Can't find her. And then you maybe look to the sunroom, and the doors of the sunroom were closed, which they never were. And the doors of the sunroom would be closed. And there would sit my dad, and you knew that Susie was tucked in the corner. And you thought, oh yeah, she's talking to Dad. And that meant that she was completely telling her life story to my father and unburdening her soul. And I don't know really how it happened. My dad was a very quiet man, but all of a sudden every friend of all his children, they would end up in the sunroom alone, unburdening their whole soul to my dad. And then the other thing is about asking favors. When people come to your house, ask a favor of them, even though they're at your house. At my house, it might be trimming trees, washing windows, making cookies, sometimes fun things like antique shopping, or practically anything else. And they always wanted to come back. They always wanted to come back. Invite people to your home. Move over that stack of paperwork on the table. Clear off a chair. Put on a pot of coffee. Feed them a meal. And be single-hearted. And now here's something very controversial. I'm afraid someone's going to leave. Use the good dishes. I know, use the good dishes. Who are you waiting for, right? Oh, we can't possibly use those. Those are for good company. What better company are you going to have? Use the good dishes. Pamper your guests. Again, this single-heartedness. They are the best guests you have because they're the ones that are there. That's the best. You don't need to wait to the Easter octave for the good dishes. Frankly, your dishes have probably been waiting there for years. So use the good dishes. And now for the super controversial thing, fasten your seatbelts here. I'm going to say something very difficult. Don't do any of the dishes till they leave.
Right.
Not a single one. Not one. Not one. Doing the dishes is one of those closing sort of moves. It's like if I went to get my coat right now or started putting on my scarf, she's going to leave soon. Doing the dishes is that sort of a closing move. Let them linger. Let them linger. And instead be present to them. A quick story of what I one time had the honor of meeting Cardinal Ratzinger right before he was elected Pope. This crazy thing, a Thursday morning in Rome. Well, of course you meet Cardinal Ratzinger, right? And we went to Mass with him, and I received communion from him. And then after Mass, he would stay until anybody who wanted to meet him would meet him, and he would stay for however long that was. So my group gets to meet him, and I was certain when he met me that this was probably the most important thing he was going to do all day, because that's how he made me feel. He had this outrageous gift of being present, immediately there with me. You didn't have any feeling of him going, hey lady, do you know how much important work I have to do for the church today? And you are wasting my time. That wasn't it. He was meeting a soul. And he knows, because I'm breathing, I'm wounded, and he knows that that soul needs to get to heaven. And I just met him, so he's partly responsible for how that's going to happen. Because every meeting with a soul can change a soul. Right? And so he gave everything. He's so present. So now, what are the conversations? So you have someone in your home. Over time, not on the first night, it doesn't have to happen. Over time, keep inviting people. And over time, let all the difficult conversations come up, even politics and religion. And if you disagree, You don't have to win the argument tonight. You're doing this over time. Don't worry. Don't kick the guest out, and don't try and win the argument. Oh, that's deluxe. That's some of the best advice I'm going to give you tonight, right? Don't try and win the conversation and don't kick them out. Instead, offer them more coffee or lasagna or whatever you have. Offer them more of it. Did you get some of this lasagna? Do you want another piece? It's fantastic, isn't it? Or did you try the salad? Did you get enough? Do you need more bread? Why? Because it's an invitation inside the invitation. They're already in your home. That's the first invitation. They knew something controversial is going to come up. We don't agree on this. And so what you're saying to them by offering them more is this is a safe place for you. You are welcome here. Keep giving it. I always tell people, don't evangelize with a bat and don't evangelize with a yarn God's eye. One is too hard and one is too warm and fuzzy. Evangelize with the lasagna, right? And keep offering more. Come through the back door. Find that common place. If you reach a controversial thing, go right back to the common place. Here's some more food, right? Mother Teresa said, love is the only thing non-believers believe. And in that she's saying, I know we've reached this controversial place, for example, that we don't agree, but I'm not going to convince you unless I love you. If I offer you more lasagna, more whatever it is, I'm telling you I love you, and we'll get over this bump. Be present. Over time, you can dig more deeply into these things. The difficult moments should always point to the resurrection. They shouldn't point just to Good Friday, right? They should point to the resurrection. Now, the third place, we talked about coffee shops, your home, and the other one is your presence. Before we said that hospitality is a lost art. You may be the stranger, and you might have to be the one who's hospitable. You might be the one, you're a complete stranger, but no one knows to be hospitable. And so you might have to start making the introductions and introducing yourself. You might have to find the common topics to talk about. You might have to pick up the slack for your real host, right? But even in public places, so you meet at the grocery store as sort of a neutral place, who's the host there? Even in public places, you still need this gift of hospitality. So when someone sees you, when someone comes to talk to you, you're present. That they know you're present. I'm right here with you, even for a short encounter. I will never forget having met Cardinal Ratzinger. I'll never forget it. Maybe it went 2 minutes, I don't know. That seems long. But it was extraordinary. I'll never forget it because he was present to me for those 2 minutes. So be present, because your presence has to be the hospitable place. Coffee shops, your home, your presence, all places of hospitality. During Lent especially, reclaim hospitality. Reclaim it. Even if you do it simply, or frankly, do it more elaborately. Why not? Right? Have the good dishes. I already told you, you must have the good dishes, right? Have the good dishes, maybe with a simple meal on it, but have the good dishes. In Lent, it's important to be single-hearted, to strip yourself of distraction, and to be present. That is utterly hospitable. When we can get to that place where we're present, it's so hospitable. And then this dispels the feelings of being alienated or being forgotten for other people. That presence, someone remembers me, someone sees me, someone hears me. So for angels, I always think of gardens. There's the big three gardens, the Garden of Eden, Gethsemane, the garden with the tomb where the resurrection happened. And in all of those gardens, there were angels. Make the garden, make the coffee shop a garden. Make your home a garden. Make your garden a garden. Make wherever you are that sort of garden. Be the angel and serve others. Christ is there in the garden. Be Christ to others, sometimes quietly, sometimes boldly. Find common ground, thirst, meal, rest. And then thirst in His way. Thirst for souls. Not thirsting just for friends or for someone to play bridge with, or, I mean, we might have that thirst too, but really thirst for souls. There's so many wounded angels. So many souls that are tired, they're thirsty, they're lost, they've given up. And what could they use? They could use a good cup of joe, or they could use a lasagna, right? Or a comfortable chair. And they need a place to rest. Let your presence in your garden, wherever you are, become a home for angels and for Christ. And the last thing is unburdening your soul, and it's grace coming in, right? We've got a place for all grace to come to. Now let's get grace in there, right? This is the best part. By entertaining angels, especially the wounded souls all around us, we bring Christ to them. And then again, that unburdening of souls. So a part of hospitality is to be ready. Be present. Get rid of your own baggage. Right? Strip down of all the things that are distracting you from Christ. And how do you do it? One, big. Confession. It's the roadmap home. Come home. Unburden your own soul all the way, deeply. My first adult confession was to Bishop Paul Dudley of happy memory. I'm sure some of you remember him. I went to his home, and it had been 17 years. It was my first adult confession too. I don't think I ever gave a serious confession as a child. And I told him some big sins. And he said to me, imagine the rejoicing in heaven today for one sinner coming home, right? It's fantastic. But then he said to me, as I'm leaving, I'm right in the doorway, and he said in a firmer voice, Alyssa, God has forgiven you. Now go home and do the hard work of forgiving yourself. And I want to tell you, one, go confess your sins, and then go home and do the hard work of forgiving yourself. Another teacher once said in a class, the Holy Spirit wants you to put down the broomstick you've been beating yourself up with. Put it down. If you grab for it again, it's an act of the will. I'm putting this down today. At least for today, I'm putting this down. At least for this 5 minutes, I'm not going to beat myself up. You must do this. Go to frequent confession. Let it come up in conversation. This is one of those things, over time, you never know with these strangers, these souls that you've met. They'll say, hey, do you want to go to breakfast? Sure, I'd love to, but on the way, can we stop first? I just want to go to confession. You never know what that does. My friend has sort of a secret code word with her brother. She's in her 30s, he's in his teens. And she'll say to him, hey, do you want to go get a pizza? Once a month, she says to him, hey, you want to go get a pizza? Yes, of course, he's a teenage boy. Of course he wants the pizza. But he knows that that includes stopping at confession on the way. Isn't that fantastic, right? The little secret code to get him there. And they don't have to talk about going to confession. They can talk about pizza. So, if you have established hospitality, there may be one day when someone has some need they need to unburden, and they feel comfortable coming to you, and then you can lead them to Christ and to His grace. Right? That's where the grace comes from. It's Him. Let's go back to that first quote. Let brotherly love continue. Do not neglect to show hospitality to strangers, for thereby some have entertained angels unawares. Be wantonly present to others. Lent is about stripping away all the excess, do away with the distractions, and be present. Lent is a time for hospitality, entertaining angels, and coming home to grace. Wouldn't it be great if at the resurrection we had all the lost souls that just we know. It'd be great. Be hospitable this Lent. Be wildly hospitable. Thank you so much.